To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the Backyard Gardens podcast, and you are here with us, Ben and Batavia. No, excuse me. Young Ben and Batavia the Botanical. How dare I? A nice, delicate bell. I like it. So it's we're getting into the season, and it's definitely a transitioning season for some. For some, it's not. But if you're wanting to transition into fall, this kind of goes along with our little mini-sodes that we had come out recently. We're going to talk about the longest fall crops you can grow, and basically the ones that start first. Wouldn't you say, Batavia?
I would hope so.
Yeah,
that was what our prep meeting was about.
Yeah. Our 30-second prep meeting? Mm-hmm. No. So before we get started, though, everybody, please, patron, subscriber on Apple if you'd like to get an extra episode every month and support the show, and buy some seeds from us. The link is down below. Check it out. We'll be adding some other products in the near future, hopefully. And get the planter app, which we'll talk about more later, because I'm sure it'll fit into this episode as it always does. Okay, so fall crops. I don't think we've recently done a very fall crop focused episode, have we?
No. I mean, we sprinkled the types of crops, in between some of these. And specifically, we pointed out things like spring and fall are not identical. They're kind of like fraternal twins.
Yeah, and, for the most part, spring and fall... Well, you just said... I'm sorry, I thought you said spring and summer. My bad.
I may have. That's what I meant, spring and fall.
Leonard, play it back. Okay, well, in case... Yeah, so spring and fall are very similar, but the planting is different, and we want to make the distinction right along the line of what it is. So a fall crop is a cool season crop that's meant to grow in the cool season and become harvestable in the cool season. To me, and feel free to correct me if you think differently, Batavia, but in the spring, the big difference is like, you can start putting in stuff like, squashes and tomatoes and stuff like that, and even potatoes, before or during spring to raise into summer. But this is a little bit different because we're raising it into the cold, not into the warmth.
Yeah, it's the, it could tolerate going into the warm weather in spring. Like it finishes when the weather gets a bit warmer, where all you have is cold or the coldest days ahead when we get to the fall season.
Yeah. So have you started any fall crops yet?
Mm-hmm. I have. So
should we wait to say what they are so we don't spoil the whole episode?
I have actually planned to wait until, a little bit later in the episode so we don't spoil the whole episode.
No, you're not hearing doubles. We just think alike. That's all. Yeah, it's, and for the record, in case you don't know, we have fall seeds in our shop. So check that link out below, just so you know. But yeah, it's one of those things where it can be confusing. And especially like in the lower tier of the country where it tends to be warmer, you think you can get away with a lot. And we can't really get away with a lot. You can for a little bit, but then it gets cold and then it's done and you've kind of wasted your time. And so the point of this is to kind of set you into the right path, either with seed starting or planting, because these longer season crops are going to go in the ground or your seed starting trays earlier than other crops.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even for the crops that you may grow in both of those seasons, spring and fall, the timing of it, and we talk about longer seasons, the timing of it becomes important because of that whole starting off in the heat.
Yeah.
Right. So even if you're starting those things indoors and then getting them out, for most of us, it's still going to be pretty warm, warmer than you would ever start planting them for spring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And to be honest, warmer than you would even think about putting them in the ground in spring. Mm-hmm. You're probably going to be putting some of these crops in the ground at the temperatures you would think to be pulling them out in the spring. So it's confusing that way. And I've got thoughts about that we'll get into in a little bit. But so the question is, what is a long season crop? Like, what does that mean? And I think it's a basic principle.
Yeah, I wish we would have talked about that bit before. When you say what is a long season crop, my immediate thought is how many days equals long season. That's the way my mind breaks that up. Wow,
so you break it up completely different than I do.
Yeah, isn't that a beautiful thing?
It is. So my mind breaks it up into how long does it take for it to be harvestable? Not day-wise, but like once you start forming that head, how long does it take to get that? That's what I think, because there's a lot of crops that you can just harvest whenever, but some of these, spoiler alert, there's no way to talk about this without spoiling it, is you're going to have to wait for some things to head. And so that can make it a little bit more difficult. So I get where you're coming from, but I feel like my definition is a little bit different. It could be the same though.
No, you have a real habit of, just giving me the same thing with a little twang. But
is that what that is?
That's not what you did here though. I feel like that feels different, but I'm just taking the opportunity to remind you of one of your
bad habits.
Yeah. When I was younger, not like child younger, but a younger adult, one of my good girlfriends and I, we would joke about, you don't want to miss out on your opportunity to cuss, like to fuss about something. You bring it up later, like, nah, man, you miss out on your opportunity to cuss about that. So I'm jumping in there. So I was thinking about how some of these vegetables, like there's a transition of sorts, so there is, if you think about anything that has leafy greens on the top, they all kind of look alike, a lot of these cool weather crops, until they start to transform. Yeah. Until they start to, transition into what kind of their kind of final destination is or something. Freaky movie. Yeah. Original.
I was thinking the original one was freaky. I was thinking about it when you were talking. It's like, like cabbage and broccoli, they look exactly the same until they actually start to grow. Yeah. God forbid you mix them up and plant them. Yeah.
Been there. We'll do that again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, and the question is like, well, when do I start them? And to put it simply, first of all, you can listen to that. We did an episode about that, one of the short fall episodes. But these are the earliest crops to start for that season, for this fall going into winter season. So it's really hard to put a date on it. Generally speaking, what did we say? 16 weeks before your first frost, they should be started. That not was planted, but started.
A line that you kind of drew was the 16 weeks.
Right.
And you broke it into 8 and 8, right?
Right. Yeah. 8 inside, 8 outside, basically. And we need just to clarify, our season extension for us is anything outside of your frost date. So anything before your frost date growing or anything after your frost date growing, that is season extension. Okay.
Wait, hold on.
That's the growing
fall
season.
Frost date. So your first frost date through your spring frost date, right? Like those are the moments of season extension.
Yes. And from fall into spring.
Yeah. And then from your first frost date from your average last frost date in the spring for us in the U.S. through your average first frost date is what we're calling the growing season.
Yeah, that's your overarching growing season.
I want to do this. There we go. So on the mini-sode, on that smaller episode, we, the shorty, it was a really pathetic bill.
It was.
That. So this is my version of a do-over.
Yeah, it's, it's one of those things too. It feels good to be consistent with something for once. And it's, I'm going to say why, because this conversation and a lot of the conversations we'll have for a while are all going to be about this. And season extension is a big part of this, but season extension a lot of times is thought about as like a structure. Mm-hmm, and I don't think that's fair to people, because knowing when a plant can and can't grow and when it thrives and what you can get away with, you're automatically doing season extension to an extent. And so it takes away from it, and then adding in a structure on top can extend it even further. So that's like your season extension is starting to add structures. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because a lot of these crops we're going to talk about, you will grow them through your frost. So you will automatically be extending your season. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think you, one of the pieces around these plants look the same, but they go through different steps, and the impact, like, you know, they transition to something different. And then also the impact of, you know, season extension methods, you know, and just generally speaking, you know, how you're crossing over seasons. I think those are all probably the most important for fall, because it helps kind of level set and manage expectations.
Yeah.
Right. You know, so if you saw broccoli grow in the spring, and again, you may have grown broccoli for eons, or maybe your first time growing broccoli, it could look different in your fall experience, in your fall garden, because again, you're faced with different weather. Same seed, same variety. You may have used the same methods to get them started indoors, if that's what you're doing. And that's the piece where, again, we're just adding to our toolkit of the things that we're learning and making adjustments for, especially if we're growing in the same climate as we have last year and that we will in the future years.
Right. And a big benefit of this is you've got time to start seeds. And, you know, moving forward into this whole process, I mean, I realize, like, we both realize, and this is why we did the episodes before, is because we knew that, you know, time was kind of running out, and we wanted to give people enough time. And so, like, if you're listening to this and you didn't listen to the other ones, you're gonna be like, well, great, you said 16 weeks for my frost, we're way past that. It's okay, because you can still plant them. You may not really be able to start the seeds, depending on where you live, especially if you're like in more northern states, but you can still plant them. And so when we take that 16 weeks, typically what I do is, like, if you get a seed starting schedule from me, email below if you want one, custom to all of your, you know, to you. But if you give it to me, I typically go by an 8-week seed starting time and then an 8-week planting time before that plant is considered more mature. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Does that make you feel comfortable?
No, I feel good about that. I was just looking to see, I have some lettuce, spoiler, that I started. I think I started it on, I'm just doing the math, I think it's probably like 5 weeks old, 4 weeks old or something. And it's itty bitty, you know?
Yeah.
And I know that, of course, if I wait another 4 weeks on top of that, it's going to be larger. But I also know the conditions it's going to really take off in.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and when we talk about 16 weeks, these are things, again, that transfer well, that we plan on, you know, either starting in seed sales or some other method outside or inside. When I hear 16 weeks, I'm not talking about the direct sowables. No,
absolutely not. You're talking about seed starting in cells, and then the second 8 weeks. Just to be very, very clear about it, it means that plant gets in the ground, and it's in the ground for at least 8 weeks before your frost comes, because that means that the roots will be mature enough to support when it gets cold like that. And, you know, typically your first frost is 32 degrees. You know, it's usually, you don't just get a frost of 15 degrees. You know, you don't just go jump into a freeze. It's usually a step down approach. So this is a good, you know, a good standard to go by and using in your garden in the future and stuff like that. So, you know, 16 weeks, split it up in half. There you go. You're bada bing, bada boom. And look, if you got to harden them off because you started them inside, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You know, you don't have to go 17 weeks back necessarily. You just factor that in and just say, like, hey, I'm going to keep an eye on it. If I need to, then maybe for the first frost, because, you know, you'll get a frost and then it'll be warm again. You might not get another frost for a week. It's not a big deal. You can cover it for the night and then you'll just get that extra week. So just keep that in mind when you're going in that direction. All right. Are you ready? Is there anything else you want to add about that, Batavia? The botanical.
Thank you, though.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Ben.
Are you ready to go on? By the way, young Ben has started to creep over into my YouTube channel, and I'm starting to see it pop up. I'm like, damn, it's catching up to me.
You know, I will take this moment to add something. And because the people that listen...
She's smirking. You're smirking when whatever you're about to say is making me nervous.
The people that are listening here are going to be the people that, I'm talking about. There are a lot of things that make me happy. And one of the things that makes me super happy is if you are watching something on my YouTube channel, Be Better Garden, and you comment about also listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we fully recognize that together we have an audience. Independently, we have an audience, right, on our separate garden adventures. And when I see, like, if I'm in your comments, like making a comment or something, and I see someone that mentions the podcast, like, I have this warm and gushy feeling inside.
Yeah.
It's almost like I enjoy listening to them, but you want to see us. Like, you want to see us.
And you didn't hear it here, but you get priority on answering, so there you go.
You did hear it here because he took the words out of my mouth.
Oh, yeah. You did hear it here because they won't hear it if they don't listen. So there you go.
Yeah, man. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
Now you can move on.
So that was a brief intro. All the other episodes that we've done recently will all cover kind of those things in general. But we need to talk about what are the crops. And then hang in there because then we're going to talk about protecting them. Because there's a time when to and not to protect them. So, Batavia?
Yes.
Why don't you give us the first crop? Don't give us a family either.
Oh, spicy, aren't we?
It is spicy. Yeah, very spicy. I felt it when it came out. Felt like heartburn.
I'm going to go with, and look, this is going to be exactly what he doesn't want, but this is what happens when you ask leading questions. Rutabagas.
Yeah. My light just went out. Can you see that I'm totally dark?
I see your silhouette.
Yeah, you see it looks
There was a whole
creepy.
TikTok challenge about this a couple of years ago. I'm starting to get uncomfortable.
What, a silhouette challenge? So, yeah, rutabagas are, and I don't know why you stole mine, but... And you actually picked a difficult one, too, that's like breaks the rules a little bit. How dare ye? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So,
that's the reason I knew you wouldn't like it. Yeah,
rutabagas... man, I love growing rutabagas. I tell you, they're fun to grow. They're one of the ones that they don't have an 8-week seed starting time. They have a 4-week seed starting time. So just remember that. But yeah, you can plant a lot of them together, but very similar in taste to turnips. Mm-hmm. Would you say? I mean, they taste different, but overall very similar. Yeah,
it's similar. I'm going to say similar with taste. Maybe I describe rutabagas versus turnips, like turnips are a little bit more solid, if that makes sense, versus rutabagas.
No,
obviously when you go to full size, rutabagas are larger.
You mean, what do you mean solid?
Like when you cook them down, you cook them, you don't eat them raw,
hell yeah,
right?
I don't. No, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm picturing like the texture, like rutabagas break down a bit more than turnips in my mind.
I think it's opposite.
I think you're right.
Yeah, turnips are more watery.
Yeah, you're
that's
right.
That's why we switched over to rutabagas from turnips. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and plus the difference in them is right now in this conversation, turnips aren't on the long season crop list.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, they get a lot bigger, so they take a lot more time, and they can grow right up through the frost. Mm-hmm. So, and all of these, again, we'll say it every time, but they're going to be season extension worthy discussions, but they will grow right up through the frost. So, I've heard, and I haven't done this, but if you put borax in your soil, when you plant your rutabagas, they will develop better if you sprinkle some borax on top. Don't know if, yeah, I read that a couple years ago, and we use we make our own laundry detergent, which if you're curious, it's washing soda and borax. We don't even use anything for smell. But we, I think it's half and half too. I'm not sure. My wife makes it, but we have borax on hand. I just never take it out there and use it. I might try that this year and see. I'll reread it and see what it was. But that's something that you can maybe do. I'd say look it up on your own. I don't feel comfortable talking about it on here because I don't really know what it does, but it supposedly helps it grow. And they have a really close planting, so you can stick a lot in a small space. That's another thing. Do you have anything you want to say about rutabagas? No more. You stole them from me. I hate you. I'm just kidding, everybody. I love Batavia the Botanical. Absolutely. She's my favorite person. I'm going to say cabbages just because I think they are the longest crop. They need to be one of the first to go in. And they are solid 8 and 8. 8 weeks started, 8 weeks in the ground. Very hardy, but you've got to wait for that head to grow. The difference is... what does that mean? What does BB mean? Notes, rutabaga, Batavia Botanical, cabbage, YB, young Ben. I don't know how many years we can do this. When I send you notes, I do this for my work. Like, you don't have to look at the note. I can't help it. It pops up in my face. It pops up in my face. Okay, new task. But the one thing that I've learned with cabbages is if it's starting to take a beating from the cold, you can harvest a smaller head. Mm-hmm. I'm world famous for harvesting doorknob-sized cabbage. So, there it is. I don't know if it's world famous. How's that patent going? I never got the paperwork back. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, but, it's funny in the spring, I got a lot of people commenting, like, I see they're bigger than doorknobs this year. Way to go, Mm-hmm. And the thing is like in a more southern state, they are more likely to hold over through the winter, go dormant, and then regrow. But just be aware that you will have loss during that time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So just be careful of that. And variety does matter too, by the way. Variety definitely matters. All right. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you with cabbage. Difference between you and I. We're still trying to grow in the fall and harvest in the fall. My time frame is much tighter based on what my weather does after my average first frost or my actual first frost. And that impacts the kind of growth I'm getting on that cabbage versus yours. So I do want to comment on that. And you kind of have to figure it out as you go along when it comes to when you're planting. But if you do get a seed starting schedule from young Ben, he'll give you the guidance you need when it comes to, all right, are you 2 weeks past the date you're really supposed to be getting those started, or do you have plenty of time? Yeah, because the big thing is, and I've learned this the hard way, is like if you've missed your window in fall, just go get a transplant. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Just wait and go get a transplant. And to be totally honest, like I haven't grown transplants in many years. Now I think I'm on my 3rd year of no transplants, but this year, one of my goals, especially with cabbage, is to get a harvest in fall or early winter and not having all of them hold over. And I may have to just get a transplant to stick in the ground to see what that timing is. I think that's a really good use for transplants, especially if you're like passionate about seed starting like I am and have made a ridiculous vow not to buy transplants. I think it's, you got less skin in the game as far as time goes. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of work through it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And if you are, because we are a bit different, like I'll pick up a transplant. If I had been growing brassicas successfully from seed, I'd be where you are too. Yeah. That's just the missing link when it comes to my seed starting. But I'm playing around with, I've bounced back and forth. I'm playing around with just direct sowing some of these things, which I rarely do. But I think that whole weird vortex of a kind of weather area we're in, where I can still grow some things, cooler weather crops in the summer, I think that may play in my favor when it comes to direct seeding, but we'll see. I'm on a direct sowing roll right now. Oh, yeah? I am. Have you guys got rain yet? Yeah. We've been getting bits of rain every day. So we're getting rain. But this year I have started 2 beds of corn, 1 bed of buckwheat, and all of those are growing. Like they've germinated, they're good, they're doing their thing. And then we just did the hardest one, parsnips. So that's the hardest one that we do. So we direct sowed those the other day. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so far I'm on a roll, man. And I'm starting to think like maybe I need to do some more direct sowing. Like I figured it out. It's just, we'll get into it when we get past it. Let's get another one in.
I think that because I took your rutabaga, I think that you took cabbage because you knew I was going to come in with cabbage. And because we're clearly in a tit for tat now, I'm coming back around with Brussels sprouts.
Oh, man, you're so rude. So
that whole preamble was like to be very clear that, yes, I'm absolutely being rude. I'm being petty. I didn't want there to be confusion around that. No, Batavia sweet. Nope, nope.
So every bit of that, yeah. We'll tidy this episode the petty episode. I'm cool with it. So do you grow Brussels sprouts?
I've tried to grow Brussels sprouts, and I grow the plants.
Okay, so you don't get the harvest.
I've not done very well on the actual production of the harvest. I've only ever grown them starting from spring going into summer. I think Brussels sprouts, and if you all are like in the Midwest, if you're in Illinois or more specifically even in Chicago, I'd love to hear from you if you're over on the Facebook page, Backyard Gardens Community Garden. I haven't chatted with many other gardeners about their success. I feel like I've read cauliflower, about this for cauliflower for sure. The difference between what does better in the spring versus the fall, or the fall versus the spring. All of that said, I think Brussels sprouts may do better for me for the fall garden compared to spring. Same thing for cauliflower.
I think, so Brussels sprout, I originally said that cabbages are the longest, and I was 100% wrong. I think Brussels sprouts are for sure. It's not an option for us to grow in the spring. I don't believe. We're going to find out this year. I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to see what that means, but I don't think it is, and I don't really want to put too much time into it in the spring season. But it's definitely a long season crop, and I don't know why. I don't get it. It's not forming a big head. Yeah. It's forming a bunch of little heads. My general saying is like, if it forms a small fruit or vegetable, you'll get a lot of them, and you usually get a lot of them fast. I don't know if I've ever verbalized the last part, but you would think that you would get a lot of them fast, but that is absolutely not the case as far as Brussels sprouts go. So
it seems like it should be similar to your cherry tomatoes.
Yes.
Right? Again, stay with us, folks. Like this idea of it's going to, maybe some of them are a little bit, Brussels sprouts, if you're lucky, are a little bit larger, but kind of similar in size. It's producing quite a few. Maybe it's the effort that it has to go through to produce in that particular way. I don't know either, and I've not stopped long enough to actually read on it. I think what ends up happening, remember I said I can grow some brassicas through the warmer part, I have brassicas in my garden right now, but they all don't play that well. Right, so I think Brussels sprouts are ones. They're in the stores here in the spring, and I've picked up the starts, planted them. The plants grow, and they grow well. I've actually just about direct seeded some of the spring, and it's that same thing. Like they start at the beginning of the budding, kind of once we get into midsummer. I just think it's too hot at that point.
Yeah, I don't think it's too hot.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think it's too hot.
For you or for me?
For you. And the reason why is because I've seen people grow them from spring, harvest them in the fall in your upper Midwest area, which I don't know why they call it Midwest. You're not really Midwest, you're Central, but whatever. It's a different story altogether. But yeah, I've seen people do that. So it may be like a fertilization thing, because they're heavy feeders. They're on the heavy feeding list.
I actually, believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I was actually going to say that.
Oh, were you?
Yeah. As I was walking through, like, so you remove the heat from it, right? You know, the heat from this cool weather crop. And if you have some example of somebody else doing it well, like there are like little microclimates that, you know, again, the pocket that I'm growing in is probably the reason why I can grow my beloved collards like in June, July, August, and so on. And in my mind, it's that weird bit of the pocket and then the way that the plant is made up where it says, oh no, that's too much heat. And if it's not, well, let me say it this way. It doesn't reach the proper growing point at the proper time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, so you go back to who you were just talking about. When are those heads forming? Are they forming more like August and then they're fully formed September, October? Or are they forming more in September? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time there, but I think there may be something in there, right? Because if when I look at some of the suggested planting dates, I'm always planting them earlier.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, and there's another thing too, which I was going to mention earlier, but it needs to be said now because I think it's appropriate. These crops need a lot of water. Mm-hmm. And they probably need more water than your tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that. So you got to remember, a lot of these crops, they're nothing. Well, I mean, they're not nothing, but they're, you know, the water content is much higher in them. So the watering needs to be upped. And I think that could be part of the process. You know, we didn't have any rain for like 6 weeks and we started getting, and we watered the whole time. But once we started getting some rain again, all of my corn just jumped. Mm-hmm. I mean, it literally just jumped in a matter of a week. And it's just, I think it's just that extra, because, you know, corn is a very water hungry plant as well. And so I think that's got a lot to do with it. And it's, you know, it's one of those crops too. Like if you grew it in the spring when they sell it and you grew it throughout the summer, I would imagine that adding shade to it would be a big help as well, just to kind of help a little bit. Because I know it can get hot in Chicago. I mean, I know you're having a cool spell now, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah,
well, you know, actually, it's more like normal Chicago summer.
Okay, well, that's like, cool for summer.
When we started recording, I had like layers of clothes, and it was like the concern on his face, like, is everything okay over there? Like a sundress and like a jacket. And it's like, well, no, I was too warm, but you know, I'm going to walk into a place that's cool later, so I want to carry it on. No, it's actually pretty nice here, all things considered, weather-wise. Which there's always something to worry about in the garden. So this probably will work well for my fall, but I'm looking and saying that my summer crops that are still left, a little bit off of a tangent, they're like, we want more heat. We want more heat. You know? Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's one of those things. So it's like trying to balance that act. So like for you, like when I plant my Brussels sprouts, they 100% going to need to be in under some shade. You probably can get away with it. And if you don't plant it early spring, I mean, I would imagine like midsummer would be a good time to plant. Just add shade, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And just as a, I feel like we may not have covered this. You tell me if you remember. But either way, we'll say it again. So sometimes the starting indoors, it's related to the weather conditions outside being more of a challenge for the thing that you're starting. But sometimes you just don't have the room in your garden at that point when it comes to where you want to set up your seeds to start, or if you want to direct sow, right? Like you may be waiting in line behind something to come out of your garden or out of a container before you can actually plant in that space.
Well, it's kind of like, it's like almost like cheating the system, I think, for fall, because you're exactly right. Like right now, if I wanted to direct sow, I would have to pull everything out of my garden, you know, and I have my garden is like almost exclusively long season crops at this point. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's a tough battle in space, open space, closed space, harvesting and stuff like that, which is exactly the place you don't want to be coming into the fall season. And that's why starting the seeds elsewhere, inside, outside, in trays, whatever, will definitely help. So, because, you know, when I start thinking about it, and I can't believe neither one of us said it, I think neither one of us want to say it, but broccoli is one too. And it's a delicate one though. And I think it's the most delicate one of them all. Would you say that?
Delicate as in sensitive to the conditions. And yep.
So, my big question is, and this comes from, and I'm actually starting to get a lot of questions about this. And just so everybody knows, I'm working on, I won't have an answer until after this year, but I'm working on it because I'm curious too, does a plant have to be a certain size before it bolts, and not all of them are the same. You know what I mean? Like I've seen lettuce that's a sprout bolt. I've seen it happen. So I know that like lettuce can do that. But like for broccoli, it's kind of one of those things. Like the question I have is it going to bolt before it starts to form a head, or does it need to actually form a head and then it triggers that mechanism for it to bolt? That's the question that I have ultimately. And I have looked and read, and I cannot find anything anywhere that is substantial evidence either way of it. I hear a bunch of hoodoo about it and people, some bro science, but I have not seen anything that's like, if their plant isn't heading, it is not going to bolt. Like I have not heard that, because that would help a lot, because then you could kind of figure out, okay, well, what's the optimal time before it starts to head, and then what are the conditions that meet the requirements for it to bolt, so I don't really know the answer to that one, but I feel like broccoli is one of the most sensitive, and I've seen some pretty small broccolis bolt before.
Yeah, I think that or when is it prematurely putting on the head that basically is going to end up bolting, right? I love the idea of I'm envisioning this as kind of charting the stages of the plant growth, right? And so when do you insert the bolting effect, right? And it's premature bolting, right? So at some point, in year 2 of that plant, if it's still alive, that's going to happen anyway, right? The natural occurrence of things. Broccoli is tricky. I'm going to say this, and I almost want it to be erased after I say it. The things I've come across along the lines of when does it bolt, does it need to form a head, it implies that if the head starts to form in cooler weather, then you're better off. Like the likelihood of it bolting is slim. But this is just, it made sense when I read it. Like I wouldn't like bet the farm on it.
Right. So if that was, and I tend to agree with that, especially with cabbages too. I think cabbages, you're pretty safe until they start to head. And I think it can kind of go either way. But, for us in my area, we live in the heartbreak zone. So it's hot, cold, hot, cold. So that is a perfect mechanism to make something bolt, which makes broccoli very, very difficult to grow. That being said, it's also very hardy, so it can grow much longer. You had mentioned earlier in your garden that it was, what'd you say? That it was easier for me to grow into the fall. My climate was much more favorable. And that is true, but the problem I have is not the weather necessarily, it's the amount of sun. And it's specific to me because of the amount of trees around my property. And so it gets a lot of shade in these later seasons. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's a hard battle. So it keeps it cooler, but then there's nothing to feed the plant as far as like sunlight goes, so it's kind of one of those things where I've got to get it in the ground so that it can kind of finish up and work its way through, because we're getting into the days now, and it's always shocking to me how much sunlight we lose this time of year.
So I did, Ben loves this stuff, and we both recognize it's kind of like a lot of people hear it as a snooze fest. But you all know my favorite site. And for those that don't, I won't leave you hanging. Timeanddate.com. Like there is a sunrise, sunset. If you do like sunrise, sunset, timeanddate.com, you could probably pull it up. And I have a buddy that I've worked with years and years ago, and like our annual texts are around this is how many hours of sunlight we have. So just a quick comparison, April 1st, I have just about 12 hours and 45 minutes of sun. So think about that in the spring. And November 1st, which is where my average first frost date sits, it's just about 10 hours and 20 minutes.
That's a big difference.
Huge
and you
difference.
put anything with shade around it. And not to mention you're losing a minute of sunlight every day, and it speeds up the closer you get to the solstice. So you'll start losing a minute, 10, minute and 20. And I think it's upwards in December. I think average is about 2 minutes a day you lose. And then you start gaining it back. But it's the same thing where it's a slow, gradual increase. So I've said this a lot in my yard that, like, especially my greenhouse, things don't really grow until about the middle of January. Then they start to pick back up. And it's all because of the sunlight. End of story.
And that's not to confuse the amount of sun that is shining down to like the heat that we're trying to kind of plant around and beat. Yeah, that's
right.
For this purpose, those are two different things. All right, my next one is, and I'm going to put it smack dab in the middle of this list because it could go shorter or much, much longer. It's carrots.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for fall.
For fall.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a tough one too, because it won't germinate if it's too hot, but you got to get it to a certain size. The way that we do it in the South is we plant them in the fall and harvest them in the spring. And I don't think I'm going to do that this year. I think it's a little too cold where I am for that. I just don't feel like protecting them throughout the summer. So or through the winter. But yeah, it's that's a tough one, man. And it's a long season too.
Yeah, I keep on. I put this back in the spring, and again, I'm not trying to be confusing about the seasons, but back in the spring when I planted my carrots, I put this I use this galvanized welded wire for different things in my garden, trellising. I use it as a barrier for different, animals that visit. And so I knew it when I did it. I basically put it on top of this really 4x2 or 2x4. You do the width first, 2x4 small bed. And I knew it. I said to myself, well, how are you going to check on the carrots? And when are you going to, it's basically these 2-inch holes. And now I'm trying to check to see are the carrots ready. The tops look wonderful, but it's not as easy to check to see if the carrots are ready. And that's kind of the difficulty when it comes to something like a carrot, even with like a rutabaga, or, if you talk about turnips, which is again further down on the list because it's not like a really long, length producer. It's easier to tell if you're getting some size on something like a rutabaga, right? It's easier to tell us if you're getting some size on something like, a turnip, again, on the shorter end of it. But carrots, it's like you're looking, and sure, when you see the shoulders of carrots, most times they're ready. But what about those weeks before those shoulders are produced or showing, right? So carrots, sometimes they're advertised at 75 days. Sometimes we look and they take well into 100 days, Yeah,
I've never had carrot shoulder. Never. So it's a interesting part of it. But yeah, I've never had carrot shoulder. You're
looking at me like that's some did I walk into some backyard garden after dark? Is that like some dirty reference or something? Carrot shoulder?
Well, it is because I've never had it happen. So I hear people talk about it a lot, but it's never happened to me. I've never experienced it. I've tried. I've looked. I don't know what it is, but I've never had that. So
I wonder maybe if it's your soil makeup.
It may be. It may be. Especially in the wild garden, which will no longer be there this year, but that's a topic for a different day. And then going into, I'm trying to think. I'll give you I thought that we were about done, but a bonus one would be like peas, because they've got to grow up the trellis, and then they start to flower. So, and they are, especially like a snow pea. Snow pea. You know what I mean? Listen to the name. So it can definitely produce, but in my experience, it doesn't produce as well into the fall as it does the spring for me. It may be different for other people, but for me, it doesn't. So I've actually seen some gardeners around my parts say the same thing. And each year I miss my spring planting for peas. I'm like, the fall is going to be it. And I'm hoping that
everyone that I've heard say their peas do better in the spring. It's just not me.
Yeah.
My garden's going to be different.
So, let's do, that's the basics of the long season crops. There's not really a whole lot of long season crops, but I feel like they're really important crops, don't you?
Mm-hmm, yeah. And just to level set, we didn't name something like lettuce because, I mean, outside of a heading lettuce, right? You know, like an iceberg or any of the other ones that are really producing a true head, you know, you can harvest them at any point. And so, you know, it's hard to say that they're a long season crop per se. So that's the reason why some of those other veggies aren't on this list.
I've never grown a heading lettuce.
You've grown romaine before. Wouldn't you consider that a heading lettuce?
No, I'm talking like iceberg. Like a round head of lettuce. Yeah, like a round head. I've never grown a head of lettuce like that. Not interested either. I don't really like iceberg lettuce. So, but I would imagine just the difference in content, like it would be super, you know, water, like hungry plant. But we get into this part and it's the protecting of them. So you're going through, it's, you know, it's tough because you got to do two different types of protections. You got to protect it in the beginning. And the first protection is wherever you start your seeds. You know, you may bring them inside where it's a little bit easier. You may do it outside. You'll have to protect there. But really we're protecting from heat. So, adding shade across the board is the way to do that. Right. But it's not like, okay, well, let me put it on the broad side of a barn so it'll get total shade. You know, shade cloth that lets some light in, stuff like that makes a big difference. Do you agree or disagree with that one so far?
I agree that shade, you're doing this in an attempt to keep that area cooler for the plants. Yeah.
And to help retain the water longer.
Excellent point.
Yep. And so once you plant it, it's the same thing. But then adding a layer of mulch is really useful. It cools the soil down dramatically, but it also helps, again, retain the water because these are very thirsty plants. They are made up of water. And as you get into the shorter season crops, a lot of those you're still going to, and we're going to do an episode about it, so don't worry. You'll get into having to grow those in the heat as well. But the cabbages and the broccolis and, you know, all these different things, they go in so early. So for me, if I do my math correct, which I hate doing math in public, I should be planting around September 1st. It can easily be 93 degrees September 1st here. So adding protection like that makes all the difference in the world. And last year I added protection and I had an overlap and everything that didn't get protection dried up and died. End of story.
Yeah, that's the we were part of the pause around, or maybe the slow to move around fall plants. It's just a different level of care.
Yeah.
You know, based on the type of plant that you're growing, like the things that like cooler weathers, they want their roots to be cooler, right? You know, versus the actual conditions you're planting them in. Like you don't have to worry about any of that when you're, you know, planting something in March or April, you know, so. No,
absolutely not. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to up my watering. So once my garden is mostly fall plants, when it's warm, I'm going to water an extra day a week and see if that helps as well. But then you get into the fall and it doesn't mean like, hey, you're going to get a 32 degree night. We got to cover it all. That's not necessarily where this sits. It's once it starts getting cold and you start getting repeated frost over and over and over. It's a very good idea to add some kind of structure over it to further extend the season. Because remember, by the Backyard Gardens podcast standards, if you are growing after your first frost date, your last frost date, your first frost date, you are extending your season. So this will further extend it. And it helps dramatically.
Agreed. I cleaned my desk off and clearly I somehow got all of the spring and summer dust out of the bale. Good night.
That's ringing hard today. So this all comes down to timing and planning, which is why we love having the Planter app as a sponsor of the show. You definitely need to check it out. There's a link below to get you a discount. It's got the drag and drop interface, but it really helps with this because you can lay out your garden the way, like visually before you actually plant to see how everything's going to be. Maybe you want to incorporate shade for something tender, and then you can use these plants ahead of time. You can visually do it. One way I could envision doing this for this purpose exactly is going through and having like an open plan on there, bunch of empty beds, whatever you have, and then go through and say like, hey, when I plant, let me come in and then put in my grids where what plants are, like I put my cabbage in, and then you can kind of follow it by there. You can put notes in there, so you can put in like, you could pre-mark your rows and say, hey, this row is going to be cabbage, started on this day, and then kind of go down the line. It's really useful for that. It tells you all the information you need about the varieties that you're going to grow. There's thousands of different varieties of plants, hundreds of different varieties of plants, all kinds of crops you can put in there. Flowers, they've got a seed box section now. You definitely need to check it out. I'm going to be building out my plan for fall here shortly, and then I'll go on YouTube and do a live of just building that out. So if you guys want to see the app in use, go ahead and come see that. I've done it before. You can see the old videos, but it's very useful, and you can save them all, refer them to the next year, see the combative and companion plantings. It's really helpful. It's available in the Google and Apple store. You can use it on your phone, tablet, or PC, and you can use the link below to get a nice discount on it. So definitely check that out. That's called the Planter app, the PLANTER app.
No, Peter and group, you deserve more.
Peter definitely deserves more for that.
Real quick note, I didn't plan on doing this, no pun intended, didn't plan on doing this, but remember how I have my spring, summer, fall garden plan all on one garden, right?
Yeah.
Through the Planter app. And it's been super helpful for me. But the thing I didn't plan on doing is I'm coming back in and I'm actually doing another garden layout for just fall, because this is the season I realize I'm struggling with the most. All of this whole I'm 4 to 6 weeks behind in the spring. Yeah, I am. But I know what to do in the spring. Like I know the wins. And that's the reason why I'm so comfortable with saying this is how far I feel like I'm behind. The timing and the... Uh-oh. Go to voicemail. Stop it. Peter, I'm sorry. I'll talk to you later. No. I want to be able to zone in on, all right, this is what fall looks like. So I'm not necessarily like doing the full, like, oh, these are other crops that were still in the garden. This is all about when I planted this lettuce head, or this lettuce transplant, when I direct sow these things. Like I want to track that more closely, because I feel like that's going to help build my next year's fall garden.
Yeah, it definitely will. And I mean, it's just a tool to put in your toolbox to further help and refer back into the past. So that being said, since we talked about the Planter app, I think we need to do the question of the day. And this one, I think is, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it this year, so I'm happy that we got one for it. This one came to the, actually it did not, it probably should have. But if you want to send us a question, you can send it on bygquestion@gmail.com or use the Facebook group Backyard Gardens Community Garden. But this one comes from Melina.
Hey, Melina.
Hey, girl. I felt like that was the next thing to come out of your mouth, so I just added it.
She that says, was the smile. Yeah, that was the, yeah.
A longtime listener and first-time email. I hope you're well. I am well, thank you. Over a year ago, I heard you mention the above worm, Asian jumping worms. Do you still come across these creatures? Do you have an idea of how they got in your yard? I live in Maryland, and there are places in my yard where I know they are. Could you tell me how to coexist with these gross things? I started to shovel any I find into an old mulch bag and placing on the curb on my trash collection days. Take care and thank you, Melina. Do you have Asian jumping worms?
No, and I was about to get in my feelings. You're like, I hope you're doing well. And you're like, I am, thank you. And I'm saying to myself, Melina's talking to us. And then she starts asking about Asian jumping worms. And I'm like, she's talking to you.
Yeah, because she says, hi, Ben. So, yeah, Asian
I'm never
jumping worm.
offended. I know that you really mean hey to both of us.
Of course. But you've never seen them in your yard at all?
I was trying to look to see, like, without interrupting the recording of the podcast. I don't think I mean, they actually jump, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't jump like with feet, but when you shove them up, they wiggle a lot.
You're really testing me here.
Well, no, because I feel like, that would be terrifying if a worm like jumped 8 feet high, 6 feet high.
Like, how like grasshoppers hop, right? Grasshoppers, right?
Yeah.
Is it like that?
No, they wiggle a lot. So when you stick a hoe in the ground, you drag it back, and they're kind of just shaking around.
Nope.
I mean,
I either have never had them, or I have the laziest jumping worms, because mine, I'm looking at it now. Nope, mine doesn't do that.
Yeah, so yours are just earthworms, which is what we all want. So the problem with the Asian jumping worms is they prey on our earthworms. And then they're invasive, so there's nothing to kill them here yet. I don't know if there's been anybody studying about them or anything like that. They came to America by their cocoons being in soil and mulch and equipment and potted plants and people's shoes and stuff like that when they come from out of the country. So that's why you have to fill out like a declaration when you come back from, being out of the country, because they try to stop things like this. So it's in our soil. Nothing can take care of it as far as naturally. And I haven't seen anything yet that's like a product that you can add to your soil. Now, that being said, I don't recall seeing any Asian jumping worms this year in my garden, but in previous years, there were a lot of them. And I've heard a couple different things. People say, like, first thing, just like Melina's doing, is removing them every time you see them. I mean, you're definitely trying to like empty out the population, but they're clearly going to come back because nothing's feeding on them. So I was reading last year, obviously you can do something like diatomaceous earth when you see them, but the problem with diatomaceous earth is the way it's made, it'll kill any soft-bodied animal that it touches. So, you possibly kill your good worms on top of that. I've heard people say, if I'm not mistaken, to put mustard on your soil, and that will actually bring them to the surface, like eating mustard. So you could try that. You pull them up, and then you put it on there, and then you scoop them up, get rid of them. But they don't even. So this just popped up on my Google here. They're not even active when the birds are feeding, so the birds can't even help take care of them. Like they figured it all out. So yeah, it's really bad, but you just deal with it. There's nothing you can do, so you just keep planting, keep feeding your soil, because the problem is they take your soil and they extract the nutrients from it, and then their poop isn't worth anything, like worm castings and stuff. It's no good. So it's just one of those things where you just have to keep adding your soil to it. Good?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I
Does
really
it
want
gross
to
you
give
out?
that one a bail, but
No. But yeah, I'm looking here. Turtles can... Yeah, so they come from Asia,
what
obviously.
bed
So
did you have them in before?
all beds.
Okay.
So it was funny. Last year on YouTube, every time I drug a hoe, you got Asian jumping worms. I'm like, I know. What do you want me to do? I can't do anything. But I did get, just like she did, I don't think this has anything to do with why I didn't see any this year, but I was religious about pulling them out and killing them. And I don't think it makes a difference, though. So thank you, Melina, for your question. I hate that we cannot help you in any other way, but stopping worms is a hard thing because they just go into the ground and they come back.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Of course I know what you're saying.
So there you go. If you'd like to be like Melina and leave us a message, you can do so on bygquestions@gmail.com. There's a link below in the description. You can do it on the Backyard Gardens Community Garden Facebook group. I know I already said that, but there you go. That's 2 times. And buy some seeds, become a subscriber, help us out. We'd love to stay on the air for you guys. And without your support, we literally cannot do this show. So please help support us any way you can. Subscribe to our YouTube channels, share the podcast, whatever it takes. Every little bit counts. And with that being said, everybody, there's one thing that we're going to continue to do on this show. We're going to always learn to grow, but we're definitely going to grow for change.
See you in our YouTube comments.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get 1 free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens Community Garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia's at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.